here with some of the Eastern leaders just to discuss some concerns. And overwhelmingly, with the proliferation of marijuana grows, based on the personal use amendment as well as the medical marijuana, we decided to host a meeting just specifically addressing that. The format we're going to do is each panelist is going to just kind of give a little brief overview of their, I guess, involvement, if you will, what they can and can't do with marijuana grows. The county attorney will address an ordinance that was recently passed. The regulatory agency from the state will address what the state permits. DEA will talk about some of their enforcement. So they're all going to give just a short overview of what involvement they have, some interesting facts with marijuana, and then we'll open it up for questions. I will let you know some of the stuff they will not be able to answer because you might be reaching into an area where there's a ongoing criminal case or it might compromise something, as well as some other topics that, for sensitivity nature, they maybe just can't answer. If there's addresses or houses you suspect that might be involved with growing, we can take that information later. We have several of our community officers and rural outreach officers here. They'll take down that information to make sure that we're looking into that. So if there's a specific concern for an address, we'll do that after the meeting. So without any further ado, if I could just ask all panelists to come up and we'll get them seated, and we'll start first with Sheriff Bill Elder.
Sorry, my hands are shaking.
I just want to know what you started with. Welcome, I'm the Sheriff, Bill Elder. I think I've met a very large percentage of you. What do you want me to start with, Joe?
Just kind of go over some of that fact sheet just with the different amendments.
Okay. I think I'd rather do a Q&A, to be honest with you. I think I'd rather spend our time with you guys answering or asking questions and us answering your questions, as opposed to just talking. Does that sound? Anybody else have anything you want to lead off with other than doing that?
Sheriff, if I can add one thing real quick to interrupt, I apologize. Back over on this table, there's some sign-up sheets. If any of you would like us to have your contact information as we develop and do maybe more of these down the road or similar things that go on out here, please leave us your information. I'll make sure to get on the list and keep in contact with you, okay? Thank you.
So I'll start off real quick just to talk. Everybody's familiar with Amendment 20 that was passed in November of 2000. That was the medical marijuana amendment. And the interesting thing that you need to recognize is these are amendments, which means they are amendments to our state constitution. They changed our constitution. They are not just laws. Okay? So that's the first piece. The second one is Amendment 64, which was the personal recreational use amendment that was passed in 2012. And so, again, another amendment to our Constitution. Since 2012, we have been working fairly hard to try and control the huge number of grows in marijuana. There's only limited things we can do, and I'm sure that Shannon will talk about that, and Lori will talk about some of the issues that are involved with how we as a county are trying to regulate that. Anybody want to chime in? You want to talk about the ordinance? You have your own mind.
My name is Lori Sego. I'm a senior assistant county attorney with the county attorney's office. And I'll add a little to what Sheriff Elder stated, just to give you a brief overview of what is regulated in El Paso County and what is prohibited. There are three main categories of marijuana regulations in my mind. There are the commercial medical marijuana facilities, the commercial recreational facilities, and then the personal grows, for either medical marijuana patients, caregivers, or those over 21 who grow their own recreational marijuana. So in the unincorporated area of El Paso County, we do allow commercial medical marijuana facilities. Those are licensed by both the state and the county. They are only allowed in a single zone district, so their possible locations throughout the county are very limited. I believe right now we only have 4 licensed medical marijuana dispensaries in the unincorporated county. Dispensaries. 4 to 6, I would say. I'm thinking 4, I could be wrong. In terms of commercial recreational marijuana, in the unincorporated area of El Paso County, the county commissioners banned those operations. So we do not issue any licenses for commercial recreational marijuana stores, grows, products manufactured. When it comes to personal cultivation of marijuana, our ability to regulate that is a lot more limited. There is not a licensing program or a licensing scheme like there is for the commercial side. So what the Board of County Commissioners did last fall is they passed zoning regulations to try to help control some of the large grows that we are seeing with people claiming that they're caregivers or that they're patients with really high plant counts. And so the Board of County Commissioners last fall passed zoning regulations, and in a nutshell, those zoning regulations say that for personal cultivation of marijuana, whether it's medical or recreational, you cannot grow more than 12 plants on a single parcel. You can only grow for personal use on a residential site. So you can't grow it in a warehouse, in an industrial area, or a commercial area. That 12 plant count limit applies regardless of how many patients live on the property, how many caregivers, how many adults over 21. It doesn't matter what your recommended number of plants is. If you're a medical marijuana patient, if your doctor says you need 30 plants, under our zoning regulations, you're only allowed to grow. And so that was passed in an effort to try to control some of these larger grows.
And so tell them a little bit about if they violate the zoning laws, what are the opportunities for enforcement?
So with this particular zoning regulation, normally our zoning laws are enforced by our code enforcement officers, and then they go to the Board of County Commissioners for enforcement, and we take those violations to court. Because of the nature of these violations, we work with the Sheriff's Office, and in this instance, the Sheriff's Office has agreed to enforce this particular zoning regulation. So any complaints that we get about marijuana grows are referred to the Sheriff's Office for investigation and enforcement. Because this is a zoning violation and not a criminal violation, we are limited by state statute as to what we can do. Zoning violations are misdemeanors, so we could charge them with misdemeanors. We also can take them to court civilly and request that the court issue an injunction prohibiting them from violating the zoning laws and require them to reduce their plant count to 12.
Is there any grandfathering in that? So if somebody had a row of 130 plants and then you zoned it, would they continue to do that? Or do they have to drop down to 12? I think I can ask questions, right?
Yeah.
The zoning regulations do not, our county zoning regulations do not allow for grandfathering in that case.
What about parental properties? For example, we have live in a subdivision called Falcon. So, of course, we have a lot of people coming in saying, hey, I'll give you $10,000 a month. And I know it's so ridiculous. If you rent me, I'm going to grow marijuana. Clearly, violating the ordinances. Does the renting party, does the landlord actually define his
misdemeanor violations under the zoning regulations, jail is possible. I can tell you that in my 11 years with the county attorney's office, we've never sent anyone to jail for any kind of zoning violation, because in general, that's not what we try to do with zoning enforcement. We just try to achieve compliance. But jail is possible. Also, when it comes to just the civil side of things, every day that a zoning violation occurs is a different violation, is a new violation. So hypothetically, if a board orders you to bring your property into compliance and you're not, you could get a $100 per day fine until you come to compliance, and that may add up. I can tell you that we have not yet taken a code enforcement case to court for marijuana violations, so I'm not quite sure how that would play out yet.
So would you do that, whoever, I'm not sure.
It would be my office, and we would certainly seek any remedy that was available to us in order to enforce that provision.
So how does a private citizen, because this has been asked to me, is if you know that next door to you is gross, because you can smell it. I mean, 12 plants will smell god awful. So how would they go about pursuing that other than calling the sheriff's office?
That would be my primary recommendation, because the sheriff's office is the office of the investigator. You can call the county attorney's office, we're going to refer it to the sheriff's office. You can call code enforcement, they're going to refer it to the sheriff's office.
Yeah, I kind of figured that was going to be the answer, but I want to make sure there's no separate people that are like, well, I'm going to call so-and-so. It's like, yeah, why don't you call the right people?
We've tried to reach out to various county departments that might get these calls, like public health, development services, and let them all know. Even regional buildings, we've reached out and said, if you get these complaints, please refer it to my office or to the sheriff's office.
I have a question. You said that there's only a few legal grow operations in the county, right? Do you have a list somewhere that's published so that a guy can, because if I call you or Deputy Schultz or somebody and turn one in, had I known the address or something or knew that was legal, I would have said, hey. You see what I'm saying?
Sure. In terms of the commercial medical marijuana grows, like I said, there are only 4 to 6 that are licensed in the county. All of them are probably I don't think any of them are east or very far east of Powers. So we've got one up the pass in Pass, and we've got a few that are sort of down in the Platte 94-24 area. There aren't any out in this area,
Well,
period.
there's 5 within 5 miles of me.
Okay, they're not licensed. In terms of whether you can gain access to that address, I'd have to refresh my memory of the state statute. When it was passed in 2012, the location of grow operations were supposed to be kept confidential to protect them from people trying to break in and steal all the marijuana. So whether that's changed or not, I'm not sure.
I can understand that, yeah.
Can I
Yes.
ask, who determined the amount of plants? You said only 12. Who determined that?
The Board of County Commissioners.
And where did they get their recommendations from?
They did a lot of research, and I actually did a lot of research on their behalf to see what other communities were doing. And most counties throughout the state ranged from 12 to 36.
Okay, well, I'm asking because I can assure you that I, as a cancer patient who used just the oil alone, I don't smoke it. And I can tell you, 12 to 36 plants will not produce enough oil for me to use for an entire year when I've only got a seasonal grow time. I don't have a big fancy greenhouse that's heated and has, power and fans and water sprinkler systems and all that. I don't have any of that. I have a little tiny seasonal thing and a very minimal number of plants. But I can't produce enough in a season to take care of my needs that I'm licensed for. So I think that y'all need to go back and take another look at that. A very serious look at that.
Thank
And Sheriff, it might be good if maybe Brian can just address what the state allows, and then maybe Kevin can compare and contrast what other states have, because I think that's causing a lot of the confusion. The county limited to 12, but the state says something different, and then, you know, you kind of compare what Colorado is to Alaska, Washington, Oregon, that also have marijuana stuff.
Before we do that, this gentleman's had his hand up for a while. Can we take his
My question is actually related to her and his response. My question is about Amendment 20 and Amendment, what is it, 74? 64. Both of those grant an individual the right to cultivate. Both of those amendments grant the power to local government bodies to regulate the commercial aspects of those.
Speak up a little, please.
Yeah,
Both, okay. So, bear with me. My question regards Amendment 20 and Amendment 64's granting the individual the right to cultivate cannabis either for medicine or recreational purposes. Those amendments also grant local government bodies the ability to regulate the commercial market. However, I don't see anything in the amendment that grants local government the ability to regulate an individual right. So my question is, what power does this authority to limit the plant
Medicinal.
counts? I mean, where does the county get their authority to limit a plant count when it's a state-granted individual right? And of those amendments that granted the right don't include provisions for their local government body to infringe on the individual right. If I'm a patient and I'm growing 12 plants, because that's what my doctor tells me, I have that right under Amendment 64. I also have a right, or Amendment 20. Under Amendment 64, I also have a right for 6. So that takes me to 18 plants. Neither one of those constitutions grants a right to local government to infringe on the right that is granted to me by the state. Where does your authority come from? That's my question.
Ultimately, I understand your question, and it's certainly an issue that has been raised a lot ever since these amendments were passed. And that is something that the courts will ultimately decide, but in the meantime, my answer is this. Amendment 20, in my own personal legal opinion, did not grant a constitutional right. I certainly may be wrong, and the courts may tell people who think like me that we are wrong. But it provided an affirmative defense to criminal charges for those folks that are in possession of certain amounts of marijuana. And so the other side of your argument is that it's not a constitutional right. It simply provided an affirmative defense to criminal charges, which is not necessarily the same thing. Amendment 64 did decriminalize the possession of small quantities of marijuana. So it went further than just providing an affirmative defense to criminal charge. It made it legal. And you're right, neither of those amendments talk about local regulation of individual growing or individual possession. However, there are other state statutes that specifically give the county broad authority when it comes to land use regulation. And so the county does have broad authority to regulate the uses that you can make of the property that you own or that you live on or that you rent. And so that's where we derive our authority from, those specific authorities granted to us to regulate the use of land and to enact zoning regulations.
So the violations are not of criminal law. The violations are of zoning ordinances.
I understand it's a loophole, but what also concerns me is the liability that the county puts themselves in from a financial standpoint if there's to be a class action lawsuit, which I understand one is pending.
Springs.
The individuals that are involved with that, I won't speak on their behalf, but I have seen some action within the local city government that suit is pending against, take steps to backpedal their grow limits and their stance on patient rights. So it all boils down to fiscal responsibility, in my opinion. Is this a fiscally responsible stance? Guess not.
I just wanted to find out, to go back to what was asked a few minutes ago. Could you identify what is legally allowed by state statute and then compare that to what has been determined in El Paso County, and then compare that to Pueblo County for us? We'd like to know, as an example, we say 12 plants, but like a gentleman over here said, I know there's a grow almost next door to me that has 3 huge greenhouses filled with plants that is not one of your designated grow sites. So is that a medicinal grow that's legal under the state of Colorado? Is that a recreational grow that's a zoning site? So where does that fit? Is there a difference between medicinal grow and recreational grow? I know there's a lot of questions, but hopefully you can put it all.
So the difference between medical and recreational, there is no difference in marijuana sense. There's no such thing as medical marijuana compared to recreational marijuana. It's marijuana. So as far as the state statute goes, there's obviously certain criminal aspects to it in the 18 code, the criminal code of the state. But as Ms. Siegel was pointing out, trying to figure out the best way to put this without confusing everybody, there are, under Amendment 20, there are certain allowed recommendations. Okay, but once again, I refer you back to the zoning stuff. So is there a law if you're outside of your plant counts? Let's try to give you a for instance. So say you have a plant count recommendation for 12 plants, okay? But you're growing 200, okay? Then you'd be outside of what the doctor recommended is, therefore would be considered criminal under the 18 code of the state statute. Does that kind of help? Does that make sense to you, or are you looking for?
Well, that makes sense, but I think there's some confusion. I've done research on what's allowed, and I've seen anywhere from 6 plants to 12 plants to 99 plants. So I think there's a confusion, maybe it's just me that's confused, whether that medicinal marijuana grows are classified differently than recreational. Because I've heard it proposed both ways of, well, I can grow legally, not me personally, but a person can grow legally 99 plants if they have the red card or whatever it is, the medicinal card. But then other people say, well, according to 64, they can grow recreationally no more than 6 plants or whatever. So I just was wondering if you could clarify, is there a difference for El Paso County between medicinal and recreational? Sounds like there's not. It sounds like it's capped at 12, regardless of what you use it for, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so when neighbors in the community have a greenhouse grow operation within a mile of your property, and it's 3 huge greenhouses filled with plants, where does that fall into the sheriff's department policing that and making sure that they're not in zoning violation? You see where I'm going with that? Yeah. And I think several people touched on that.
What it sounds like you're describing, it sounds like a caregiver kind of plan. And once again, if you're falling under the county zoning regulations, they're allowed to have 12 plants, regardless. Because under the state, it says, I can be a caregiver. Okay, so I can register with the state and I can be a caregiver for 5 other patients. Okay, and I can grow their recommended plants, whether it's 6, 12, 99. Okay. However, what they're explaining here with the county ordinance, the zoning ordinance, it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter whether you have your medical recommendations and you're a caregiver, or you're just growing your 6 recreational, say you have 2 adults over the age of 21, and you don't have medical cards, but you can grow 6 plants, and the other person living in your house over the age of 21 can also grow 6 plants, limiting to you again at 12. So I guess that's your separation there for your medical and your recreational. I mean, it's so difficult to separate. I mean, without seeing what that person has or neighbor has with 3 large greenhouses, they may be your caregiver. They may be operating a completely and totally illegal growth.
But according to county regulations, they're only allowed to have 12 plants whether they're a caregiver or not.
Right.
Isn't that what was just said?
Yes.
Regardless.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like people are working under the state statute, but they're not really complying with the local statute.
Correct.
So they're under that pretense of a caregiver for a caregiver for a caregiver, so therefore I can have my 500 plants in my greenhouse, and so they're going on that pretense, but really, in fact, they should be, the sheriff's office should be knocking on their door saying they're in zoning violation because they're not complying with El Paso County's laws.
You're correct.
And it seems to me like you need a whole lot more teeth in your regulations to, you know, get them to abide by what's going on, because what you just said, anything on that side of Powers, anything on this side is illegal. You know, when you got an 80-foot building or 90-foot building with chain gate and 2 Dobermans and a pit bull.
And I'll piggyback on that. I'm a chief deputy in the district attorney's office, and everybody up here has worked together regarding these contradictions. While Lori handles it on the civil side, I handle it on the criminal side. So like Adam was talking about, we prosecute under Title 18. And that's where, going back to 3 huge greenhouses, right, with who knows how many plants, we need to work with the sheriff's department, whether that's the rural enforcement unit or Adam and his unit. We've got to work together to first, in a criminal case, establish probable cause. And you hit it on the head because they lock their gates and they have dogs and all of these things. And law enforcement can't just walk onto someone's property, right? They've got to ask for consent. If someone keeps their gate locked and the dog's out, our cops aren't going to go up there. So we've got to start developing what's called probable cause, right? So we're going to be looking for what can we do to get a warrant to get into those grow houses. Because you're right, they're illegal. And that's the problem out here. I think that the people who are doing it correctly and legally, that's not the purpose of this meeting, and that's not the target. We want to shut down the illegal grows, and how we do that is develop probable cause, whether that's sheriff's deputies. How many air conditioning units does one home need? 10? No. How much water are they going through? Okay, granted, you can't get a water bill on a well, but we can look at usage, we can look at electricity. Someone
check with the local drillers and find out where they're putting in huge wells on your property.
Clippings in the dumpsters, the odor, semis driving to and from constantly, that's going to get you probably a warrant signed. And then we can go in legally and look around and figure out what charges we have under Title 18. Because that's more than what Lori's talking about as far as an injunction or maybe not a jailable offense. I mean, under Title 18, you go to jail, you can go to prison, whatever it is, even though the legislation every year kind of decreases our power over these drug cases. You know, they make them DF4s, DF5s, DF6, whatever. But that's more, I think, on point as far as what we need to see happening.
I'd like to ask a question. 2 things, actually. Number one of the situations you may be seeing is Amendment 20 does give an affirmative defense. So if that actually is a very sick person growing those plants, they're going to grow them anyway if it's saving their lives. And what's probably going to happen is if they're charged, they'll file and do like Bob Kraus did and sue the state and sue the city and all of that. My question is, what are the numbers? how prevalent is this problem versus how many homes that we have in El Paso County? I know the DEA at the Colorado Springs City Council threw out 186 and said that could be quadrupled. If you match that up against the homes that are in Colorado Springs, they have over 185,000. If you do the 186, it's less than 1/10 of 1%. Even if you quadruple it, it's still less than 1%. So I'm wondering what the numbers are that you guys are seeing.